Good morning, and thanks for tuning in, spending a little bit of time with us here at Compeer Financial. We wanted to put out a short video talking about, or short resource here talking about prevent plant and specifically cover crops and what you can and can't do with cover crops and prevent plant. We've been moving around, really busy, as you know, doing insurance meetings, talking about prevent plant in great detail. And as I've been moving around talking about it, I've just realized that there's a lot of misinformation floating out around the countryside. And so I wanted to do a series of short videos kind of outlining a couple of these areas. And the first one that we're going to do here today is dealing with cover crops. We do have a more lengthy PowerPoint recording out on our website that's linked to YouTube that talks about prevent plant in great detail, what you can and can't do, what the rules are, and how prevent plant works. I would urge you to go out and check out that resource if you haven't already. But following that resource, we are just going to be publishing a few shorter videos dealing with some specific areas because it is a confusing part of the policy that we don't often dig that deep into. But as you can see around the countryside, the need is there because we are underwater in a lot of areas. So today being May 31st, we've reached some of our final plant dates for corn in some of our territories. Wanted to talk through that real quick before we jump into the cover crop conversation. So you've seen this slide before if you checked out our full prevent plant webinar, but just wanted to touch on it again. So we look at our final plant dates for both corn and soybeans in those middle columns there towards the left. And you can see that in Minnesota and Wisconsin, final plant date for corn is May 31st. That's the southern half of those states. As you move north into northern Minnesota or northern Wisconsin, those dates will change. I just urge you to get with your local crop insurance agent to dive into what those dates are in the counties that you're specifically in so that you know exactly what the dates are. And then in Illinois, the whole state is June 5th for corn for our final plant date, and soybeans are listed there as well. What does those final plant dates mean again? Really, that just means I have full insurance coverage on my policy as I plant corn and beans up to those dates. Once I continue to plant past those dates, I still have coverage, but my coverage starts to reduce 1% a day to my revenue guarantee. Those late plant periods are over there to the right for both corn and beans. That's the window that I can keep planting past the final plant date and still have coverage. It's just starting to get reduced every day as I plant into that late plant period. As I said, today, May 31st, we have reached our final plant date for most of Minnesota and Wisconsin for corn, and then June 5th coming up for Illinois here soon. So with regard to cover crop, there is a resource in the actuarials that walk all of the approved insurance providers, the insurance companies, through what can and can't be done with cover crops. It's out there. This comes straight from that resource. So this isn't my opinion. This isn't Compeer Financial's thoughts or understanding. This is the actual language that I'm going to be pointing to. And we took that resource and broke it up into the next 3 slides to talk about the differences between cover crops and what can and can't be done. So this first slide is talking about cover crops from 2018. As you can see on the far left there, it's cover crops that were planted prior to that final plant date that we talked about on the previous slide. So to me, that covers stuff that was planted all the way last fall. So that's what we're talking about in this section here. And then in the middle column is what I did or didn't do with the cover crop. And then on the right side is how it affects my prevent plant payment. That first column says that there is no effect to the prevent plant payment. I get paid 100% of it. The second column says that I do get a prevent plant payment. It's just lower. It's 35%. And then the far right column says I get no prevent plant on my spring crop if I do those things. So we'll walk through it. So 2018 cover crop planted. It's in the field today, still there, and you're going to claim prevent plant on corn or soybeans. You're on your spring crop. And you want to know how does that affect? How does that standing cover crop affect that prevent plant payment, and what can I do with it? So the first 2 options there, RMA does allow a window here that I can hay or graze that cover crop in between that final plant date and the end of the late plant period. So if I go back a slide, over here on the right-hand side, you've got that window, that late plant period for both corn and beans across our territory. I can hay or graze that old cover crop during those windows. And if I do that, you can see there in my column there, nothing happens to my prevent plant claim. I get paid 100%. If I harvest that cover crop, harvest it for grain or chop it like wet matter silage, if I chop it at any time, I'm going to get no indemnity on my prevent plant. You can see over there to the right. And then the bottom two columns or rows there say that I hay or graze it after that late plant period that we talked about on the previous slide, but before November 1st. So if I do it during that window, then I do get paid a prevent plant payment, but I just get paid a lot less. I get paid 35% of that indemnity. So this is old 2018 cover crop that's out there. So I would just rehash or recap by saying you can hay or graze it during that late plant period and nothing happens to your prevent plant claim. Can't ever harvest it. And if I hay or graze it after that late plant period, then I'm going to get a payment, just going to be reduced. I should also say here, and we talked about it in our previous webinar, anytime my payment is going to get reduced by, down to 35%, I'm also going to get an APH yield penalty plug. 60% of my approved yield is going to be plugged in for those acres that I do that on. So it's kind of getting hit over the head twice. I get a reduced payment and I get an APH penalty yield plug stuck in my database. The next section talks about cases where I'm going to claim prevent plant on my corn or beans spring crop and then plant a cover crop after that to help with conservation and whatnot. So I can do this, but here's that same kind of flow. If I harvest it at any time, the top two lines, I don't get that prevent plant payment. It goes away. I void it. I relinquish it. It doesn't get paid. If I hay or graze that new cover crop, but I wait until after November 1st to do it, then nothing happens to my prevent plant payment. I get paid 100%. And then at the very bottom there, if I hay or graze it before that November 1st, my payment goes away. Why is that? Well, if I'm harvesting that crop or haying or grazing it before November 1st, it's no longer an approved cover crop. It's now a crop, and so that does affect my prevent plant payment. So as the previous slide, we talked about old cover crop that's still in the field. This slide is talking about cover crop that we're going to seed following my prevent plant payment. And all that I can do with that, basically, to recap, is I can hay or graze it, but I got to wait until November 1st to do it. And then the last option is cases where I'm going to plant that cover crop. I'm going to claim prevent plant on my corn or beans, and I'm going to plant that cover crop really late. I'm going to plant it after the end of the late plant period, really late. So if we go back to our previous slide on dates, if you're in Minnesota, Wisconsin, I'm planting that after June 25th, actually in Illinois as well, after June 25th. Northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, those dates change a little bit. So just, again, check with your local agent to find out exactly what you can or can't do compared to what county you're in. But I'm on this slide. I have claimed prevent plant on spring crop, and I've planted my cover crop, but I've done it really late. In this world, things change a little bit. If I hay or graze it after November 1st, just like the previous slide, I get 100% of my payment. No harm, no foul to my prevent plant loss. But you can see now if I hay or graze it before November 1st, my prevent plant payment gets reduced. But also that middle section there is RMA does allow me to harvest this cover crop and still get a payment, just reduced payment, whereas the previous two slides I couldn't harvest it at any time. So the rules do change a little bit here as I get that cover crop in really, really late. I would just ask most of you, how late are you comfortable planting a cover crop? And I think RMA has landed on the availability to harvest it, thinking that it's that far late. There's a really short window for it to actually mature and probably won't. So that's probably a case where they're going to allow you to harvest it. Some other cover crops information, I'll just shoot you to Compeer.com, obviously, to get more resources. But let's just talk quickly about cover crops in general and some of the myths and some of the rules that are flying out there. First of all, everyone wants a list of approved cover crops. Show me a list of the crops that I can plant as approved cover crops. And there is no list that exists. There isn't one. there's a website that USDA has out there, www.nrcs.usda.gov, that can walk you through some stuff on cover crop, termination requirements and planting requirements. But there's no list. And really the reason is the cover crops that work in California don't work in Illinois, and cover crops that work in Illinois don't work in Florida. So the language actually says any crop can be an approved cover crop as long as a couple things happen. Number one, it's got to be recognized by a local ag expert for your area to be an approved cover crop. Can work in your area as a cover crop. Your insurance agent and your insurance company are not that local ag expert. So find a local ag expert that can direct you on what cover crops work in your area, your county. Also, it's got to be seeded at a cover crop rate. So check with that local ag expert to find out what that seeding rate is for that cover crop. And then thirdly, you can't harvest it, except if you're gonna plant the cover crop extremely late in the year, but you can't harvest it otherwise. So one of the big questions that comes up, I'll just address it here, is can soybeans be used as a cover crop? And the answer is yes. Any crop can be used as a cover crop. But with those soybeans, number one, an ag expert has to approve it or agree that it's an agronomical practice acceptable in your area. You have to seed it at a cover crop rate. Again, I don't know what that rate is, but it's much lower. So you're seeding those soybeans at a much lower rate than you normally would have. And you can't harvest it. So I guess the question is, if you plant that as a cover crop and that half-seeded or lower-seeded soybean cover crop ends up looking like 20 bushel or a lot like 20 bushel, 15 bushel, 25 bushel, whatever, in the fall, are you going to be able to disc those under and not go harvest them? Once you harvest them, they're no longer an approved cover crop. They're a crop, a second crop, and then your prevent plant payment is going to get reduced to 35%, and you're also going to get that APH yield plug hit. So those are some often questions we get asked when we are talking about cover crops that I wanted to just chat with you about. Again, go to Compeer.com to get more information, see some of our other videos that exist out there as well. I'll link to YouTube, and we'll continue the conversation with some more resources as we move through these next couple of days and next couple of weeks to keep you informed so that you can make the best decision possible. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your business. We're here for you. Give us a call and let us know how we can help. Thanks, and have a great day.